4, 3, 2, 1. Are we rolling? All right, good. Okay, so our guest for today needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Everybody, world-renowned tech ethicist Huxley Pendleton. How are you doing, Huxley?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. It's an honor to be here on your show, Ray. I've always wanted to be on the Ray Morgan extravaganza, and it's hard to believe that the time has come.
Well, the time is here, and the time is now.
Indeed.
I guess maybe what we should just do is kind of just jump right into it. So
Let's go for it.
all right. So you're a tech ethicist, right? So one of the things that I hear a lot about commonly these days is big data, and people are always saying this like it's some big scary thing. Oh, watch out for big data, but nobody ever really says what exactly it is. So what is it that we mean by big data when we're talking about this sort of thing?
Yes, big data refers to the colossal data sets harvested from everything you do, both online and offline.
Okay, so you're probably not going to remember the world this way, but you're much younger than I am. But when I was a kid anyway, if you wanted to talk to one of your friends, what you'd have to do is you'd have to go outside, get on your bike, pedal it down the street, knock on your friend's door, have an awkward conversation with his parents, and they'd probably be rude to you because they didn't care about kids back then for whatever reason. And if he wasn't home, what you'd have to do is leave a message with his parents and go back to your house, pedal all the way back down there, get back inside, and wait in your living room for a phone call. And you only had one phone, and it was tethered in place and couldn't move. And if one of your parents or one of your siblings, if you had them, was on the phone, you'd have to just sit there and wonder if your friend called while they were using it. So nowadays, we're much more connected, and like when you want to talk to a friend now, all you got to do is, roll over on the couch, lick the Cheeto dust off your fingers, and shoot them a text. So it's a little bit different as far as what sorts of things we do online. So what really is it that is captured by this sort of big data stuff? What are the sorts of things that it uses?
Right. So virtually every purchase you make, every link you click, and every screen you scroll is automatically recorded and analyzed.
Okay, so that's obviously a huge difference, right, from time to time. But why does that really matter, you think?
One area where big data seems to matter a lot is politics. Before, when you wanted to make your political campaign succeed, you would have to go out and research demographics. And then you'd have to reach your target audience via advertisements, mailers, etc. And so those techniques are all very broad stroke techniques that address large swaths of the population. Nowadays with big data, you can send out individualized, specific messages to particular people in a hidden and targeted way, which is completely different from how things were done before.
All right, so it's automatic and it's sort of individual and targeted. Again, I'm just going to push the question of why exactly does that matter? So maybe let me get a chance to take a shot at this. So maybe it's the thing that if this gets into the wrong hands, if the wrong sorts of people get the big data stuff, all that tech stuff we talked about, they could potentially do some nefarious sort of bad stuff. Is that what we're worried about?
Right. So it's different from before because before it happened all publicly. So a pollster would have to come and ask you questions or organize a focus group, whereas nowadays there's individualized profiling and modeling that happens all in the background. And so you don't know that it's going on. And so they can collect all this data about you without ever having to talk to you. And that gives them opportunities to conduct social engineering on an individualized level and do all kinds of testing in the background with you never being aware of it. Whereas before, you would have these advertisements being broadcasted nationally. And so we could all take a look at what was going on and discuss their merits or demerits, whereas now this is all hidden from behind the public's view.
Okay, all right, I see. Okay, yeah, I think I get the tech part of it for the most part. So, but I want to also ask you a little bit about the ethics side, because I mean, you're a tech ethicist, right? So, if I get that whole story about how the technology works, what's different on the ethics side? What sort of differs ethically speaking?
Sure. So there are four major ethical theories that are generally discussed. There's Kantianism, utilitarianism, social contract theory, and virtue ethics. And we can use all of those to examine ethics in the context of big data.
All right, so it's been a while. I did once take a Philosophy 106 course, which was, of course, my favorite class ever. But it's been quite a bit. So could you brush me up on those theories? I think the first one that you mentioned was Kantianism.
According to Kantianism, there's what's called the categorical imperative. And there are various formulations of it, but we'll stick to one of them. And this formulation just tells you never use another person as a mere means, only treat them as an end in themselves. And what that means is don't use people as mere tools. Treat them with dignity and respect, as if they're able to make decisions on their own autonomously.
Okay, that makes enough sense, I think. The second type of theory you said was utilitarianism?
Yes. According to utilitarianism, the morally right thing to do is whatever will best promote overall well-being. And so you want to increase well-being as much as possible.
Okay, that's fair. I guess I can get my mind around that. Next theory being social contract theory, right? That's the next one you said?
Right. So social contract theory tells us that morally right actions are ones that free, rational, autonomous, and self-interested individuals would agree to under a hypothetical scenario in which they're fully informed of all of the relevant details.
All right. And last but not least, I think you mentioned virtue ethics, right?
Yes. According to virtue ethics, morally right actions are ones that the morally virtuous person would do in that situation when acting in character. So take your favorite role model, say a trusted mentor, a beloved parent, Tilda Swinton, and imagine what that person would do in that scenario. Whatever actions they would do are the ones that are morally right, and the actions that they would not do are ones that are morally wrong.
All right. I mean, that makes enough sense sort of in the abstract. But I mean, I'm still wondering how exactly we apply these things to big data, which is what we've been talking about this whole time. So let me see if I can get this right in applying them. Imagine there's a person generating data by using apps, surfing the web, etc. Imagine there's also a data harvester collecting all this data. Let's suppose that, in one case, the data harvester will sell the info to scammers, and they'll do some nefarious things with it.
Devious.
Let's suppose, in a second case, that the data harvester only sells the information to healthcare providers, who will then use it to make healthcare better and more effective for everyone. So, according to Kantianism, in the first case, the scammer case, the data harvester has done something wrong because they're using the data generator as just a mere means, as just a tool to get money that they get from selling the data. But In the second case, the Kantian might say that the data harvester has done something morally permissible because they may have done it with the intention to respect the humanity of the data generator. Now, according to the utilitarian, in the scammer case, the data harvester has likely done something wrong because even though the data harvester's well-being has gone up, maybe even quite a bit, probably the well-being of the data generator has severely been decreased, which means that this probably doesn't maximize overall well-being. But in the second case, the utilitarian might say that the data harvester has done something morally required because by giving that information to the healthcare providers, who in turn make healthcare better and more effective for everyone, it seems likely that they're maximizing overall well-being for everybody. Am I right so far?
Yes, absolutely correct.
Okay, now for social contract theory. In the scammer case, the social contract theorist is probably going to say that this is not morally permissible because if they were given full information and they were rational and they were self-interested, probably the data generators in this case are not going to agree to this sort of arrangement.
Exactly.
But in the second case, in the healthcare case, social contract theorists would probably say that this is morally permissible because if given all the information about how the data is going to be used, the data generator probably would agree to this sort of arrangement.
Indeed.
So for our last application to virtue ethics, in the first case, in the scammer case, a virtue ethicist is probably going to say that the data harvester did something wrong here because it's very likely that a virtuous person would not sell someone's information to a scammer. But in the second case, a virtue ethicist might say that this is morally permissible or even morally required because a virtuous person would sell that information to a healthcare provider if the healthcare provider was going to use it to make healthcare better for everyone. Is that right?
Saving lives, yes, absolutely.
Good. Okay, so I guess now I understand how we might apply those theories to big data, generally speaking, as big abstract theories. But I'm wondering what are people out there actually working in this field saying about this? What are they thinking about?
I think we have this tendency to see algorithms in this sort of neutral way. And because they're neutral, they're fair. And some people think that, okay, if we use algorithms, they're always going to be objective and do things right. But not everyone thinks that. Some people think that big data by its nature is unfair. The first way that big data may be unfair is that without any modification, data acts as a social mirror, which means that any of our pre-existing biases will be reflected in it. To give you an example, imagine that there's a neighborhood with hundreds of people, and they're trying to make an algorithm to determine how often people are away from their home. And so how they'll do that is they'll record how many times they observe people leaving their homes. And now let's suppose that there's this one curious, eccentric individual in the neighborhood. Call him Mark. People are always staring out of their windows, observing Mark. And so the data reflects that he leaves his house all the time, even though he leaves just as often as the other people in the neighborhood do. The second way in which big data may be unfair is through sample size disparity. To give you an example of that, suppose that we have a group of 100 people, the majority, and they all have common names like these. Now, there's another group of 10 people, the minority, and they all have names like these. And a social media company is trying to make an algorithm to take out fake profiles. And they're doing this by discarding any profile whose name is rarer than, say, 2% of the population. Well, it turns out in the minority group, all of those profiles are misidentified as fake, because even though in those groups those names are common, the sample size is too small to show us that. Even if we collected twice the amount of data, so if the majority group was 200 and the minority group was 20, the percentage of people with the relevant names in the minority group would still be the same. Even though more people would have those names in the doubled sample size, there are still not enough of them to pass the 2% threshold. Therefore, they will all still be misidentified as fake. The third way that big data may be unfair is that data does not account for cultural differences. Suppose that we have a group of 100 people with names like these. Now suppose there's a group of 10. And in this culture, everyone has a unique name, such as these. No matter how much data you collect, you're never going to get any repeated name. Therefore, if we use the same name classifying algorithm from before, all of these profiles would be misidentified as fake. The fourth way that big data may be unfair is due to undesired complexity. So there are three ways that this can happen. First, the attribute that we're trying to classify for may be objectionable. So take any kind of racist attribute. Second, the attribute we're trying to classify for may be vague. There may be borderline cases. Third, combining classifiers is computationally complex. Going back to our name example, if we were to make a separate algorithm for this group and a separate algorithm for this other group, and then we tried to combine the algorithms, it would be hard to determine which profiles are real and which are fake. The fifth and final way that big data may be unfair is the 5% error. No matter how good your data are, there's going to be a margin of error. Usually, it won't get any smaller than 5%. But then, we have this 5% of error. What explains it? It could just be noise, and so our algorithm's fine, there's nothing wrong. However, worse, it could be that minorities are being misclassified. So for instance, take an algorithm that classifies a group of 100 people. For this group of 90 people over here, the algorithm is 100% accurate at classifying them. On the other hand, for this other group of 10 people, the algorithm is only 50% accurate, which is the source of the 5% error. Clearly, the algorithm is unfair to this minority group.
All right, well, there is a whole lot more to say about this sort of thing, and lots of interesting stuff still out there, and I'm sure I'll have you back to talk about it. But for today, it looks like we're wrapping up on time here, so I guess we should probably just call it here, and I'll thank you for coming by.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. This has been a tremendous opportunity, and I'm glad to have had this discussion with you.
6 feet.
Oh.